If you're ready to upgrade from flat to realistic watercolor paintings that pop, this tutorial is for you. As I take you through each step for this easy snowman painting, you'll get to learn realistic watercolor basics and experience firsthand how easy it is to paint in this style. I've been painting with watercolors the past 3 years, and I can tell you that the techniques for realism are a lot easier than most think. And that's when you know the process that I'm going to share. I picked this photo because a snowman is easy to draw, and there isn't a ton of detail or colors to worry about, but it's still a very 3D real-life object, which makes it perfect for a beginner wanting to learn realism. I find 100% cotton cold-pressed watercolor paper to be a lot better for realistic watercolor painting. Now, if you only have cellulose papers, the most common kind, it's alright. Paints might just dry a bit faster for you. We need 3 circles for the body, the face and the top of the hat, and from there, it becomes easier to reshape each circle to match the snowman itself. Once I have the main shape for the subject, I start drawing smaller elements like the scarf and the gloves. Depending on what you paint, a preliminary sketch is or isn't important. We only need one here because we want the painting to look like a snowman. The sketch will guide us, but that doesn't mean that there isn't room for small mistakes when we don't deal with a human portrait. Let's add the last details like the eyes, the mouth, and the buttons, and the sketch is finished. There are a few things to do to turn a flat sketch like our snowman's into a realistic painting. A good reference photo will guide you, so that's definitely something to think about. And then there are colors. A rule I like to follow for myself is to stick to just a few colors, like here, yellow, red, and blue. No need for more to paint realism. First takeaway for those of us who, like me in the past, feel like we need all the colors to paint what we want. I proceed to create little puddles of paint. I try to make sure that the puddles are runny enough that the paints will be able to flow on paper, but I also add enough pigment for my paints to make sure that the color actually shows, since watercolor tends to look lighter when it's dry. You can see here that my puddles are a bit see-through, but not too watery nor too thick, and you can see the difference on paper between these 3 consistencies of paint. Now that we have that, let's apply a base layer. Painting in layers is the best way that I know to paint realism, and the best way to do it right, especially if you're a beginner, is to start with light colors, also why my paint mixes are creamy, not thick and opaque. I'm starting with yellow to give the snowman and snowy ground a nice glow because a realistic snowman isn't going to be white. Realistic whites hold plenty of colors, and in a watercolor painting, 1 or 2 will already do a lot to build up that 3D look. A favorite technique of mine to avoid the harsh dry watercolor lines that we see in flat paintings is to soften those harsh edges with a clean and damp paintbrush. I also add a little bit of blue here, but I'm careful not to overlap yellow and blue, as they would make green together. I find it's easier to paint everything and keep building up on first layers, rather than focusing on one part then moving on to another part. That's why now I'm mixing red, a little bit of yellow, and blue to create a grayish color for the gray woolen clothes that the snowman is wearing. And remember, we're painting a base layer, so we need to thin that mix with water. Notice that in the hat, I tapped the paintbrush on the pom-pom. I'm not sure how to call that in English. Let me know if you know. And this creates that sense of fluffiness, so you can also act on realism through your strokes. Another example is this part. I follow the curve of the head to shape those lines, and that alone helps in building realism. I still soften harsh edges with a clean and damp paintbrush most times. That really helps in making the paint look like it's part of the paper, because it's slowly fading into it thanks to the water that I use to soften an edge. But I find it's not a must to do it everywhere and for everything, just so any paint that we add doesn't look like we just added it, which could be seen in flat watercolors, but rather like it is a part of the subject itself. I'm teaching all of this, the techniques and this particular snowman, as well as a lot more realistic watercolor paintings in real time on my Patreon. So if you feel like you might need even more guidance, I'll link that in the description along with a detailed list of the supplies that I'm using. For the scarf, let's add a little bit of red and soften the stripes as we go. Because if I paint all the stripes and then I try to soften all the harsh edges at once, the paint might be dry already. I also take advantage of this section by section approach to add yellow into the mix towards the base of the scarf, only to add another color to this scarf than just red. And it's like whites in the color red. There are many shades. Some are more purple, some are more yellow, and that's why for realism, you really want to think about including several colors instead of adding only the main color that you see. Let's also mix yellow and red to paint the orange nose. This is looking great already, but to make it fully realistic, we need to add some shadows. It's absolutely key to realism. And if you observe a flat painting, you will notice that either it has no shadows or barely any shadows at all. And the problem is that we're often afraid to paint dark ones. That's why we need the layers, so it can be done little by little until we see that it's enough. Because each time we have a chance to step back and just reflect on what we've done. And that's why I'm creating this purple color from mixing blue and red. Also why it's not too thick and opaque yet, because we want subtle shadows to begin with, and we can adjust later if we need to. Chances are that the paints from the base layer should be dry everywhere by now, but if they're not, we'll need to make sure that they are so that we can layer without disturbing that base. And remember that watercolor is transparent. That's why layering is so great. By overlapping colors like I'm doing here, I end up with new subtle shades of color, which again is great for realism. Only 3 main colors lead to so many others through mixing them in the palette, but also layering them on top of each other on paper. I add this purple color everywhere, and that's when the reference photo comes in handy for me and I think all realism painters. In general, I can tell you that small spots to think about are all the things that are underneath something else, like here, the areas underneath the hat, the nose, the scarf, the buttons, and also places that are farther back from other ones, like here, each side of this round face and body. And then any extra shadows that the lighting in the photo might create for that specific subject. You can see already how 3D this is looking with simple techniques that I repeat again and again, but there are 2 or 3 more things that we need to do still. The first one can be a hit or miss, and I'm talking about details. You need to add details, but not too many, and add them with precision, but not too much precision. There, for example, we will add some texture with a dry brush technique. That's when there's color on your brush, but little water. And you just need to tap the dirty paintbrush on a paper towel once or twice to remove that excess of water. Then you really want to hold the brush horizontally to let the paint deposit itself where you want it. And you'll notice that the most textured the paper is, the more you will see that effect coming through. Now let's add a little bit of red in the cheeks. And my technique here is just to wet the spot first, then drop red paint. It's super quick to do and there's no harsh edge. Before moving on to the eyes and the mouth, the cheeks need to be dry, otherwise any newly added paint will bleed in there. And to create dark darks with my colors, I play with ratios, and most times adding more blue than red and yellow does the trick. It's also important here to stick to a thick mix of paint so it looks really opaque for those parts. And it's not a must for a beginner or someone who wants to try watercolor, but notice I also have these round and pointed paintbrushes that do help with painting clean and realistic features and details. They're by far one of my favorite tools. From there, I think it can be great to add a few stronger shadows. We can use the same mix as what was created for the eyes and the mouth, or add more red for a dark purple look. And always make sure to soften the edges, otherwise it won't be too discreet in the final painting. We will be able to tell that it was added on. Bright highlights are the best to make a realistic painting shine, but be careful not to overdo it, just like details. My favorite tools are white gouache or white watercolor. And here, I think a white gel pen is going to be ideal to add these small touches, so that's what I'm using. You notice how these details don't even need to be perfect. These broken lines add so much to the painting. And we really don't need perfection or many colors and many complicated techniques, not even a complicated sketch for realism. I hope I made my point here. If this tutorial was helpful, please let me know in the comments. I'd greatly appreciate knowing. And if you enjoyed this, you will love painting these little animals here as we get a bit deeper into realism and more techniques. Thank you so much for watching and see you next time.